This video is not intended for children.
Just as a quick FYI, I'm relearning correct audio levels with this new equipment, since some specs that quote-unquote should be the same aren't. So if things sound weird, that's why, and please let us know. Now, on to the video. Hello everyone. After a long hardware-based hiatus, we're back. Our topic this week was requested by David Marlin and Maurice Beaver. We'll be going over Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher franchise. As this video's topic is the protagonist of the series, massive spoilers ahead for the Witcher books and games.
So, first things first. The Witcher franchise is composed of a book series and a video game series, both of which are set in a medieval fantasy world with numerous homages to real-world ancient myths. There are currently 8 books in the Witcher series, with the first 2 being collections of short stories, 5 of them being full-length novels, and the most recently published one being a side story that sits in the middle somewhere, and, by design, doesn't really matter to Geralt's overarching story. The game series takes place approximately 5 years after the books end, and for those wondering, the new Netflix Witcher series goes over events from those first 2 short story collections. As a final note on continuity, the games take place after the books, and as such the books are all canon to the game's storyline. But the games are not canon to the book's storyline. The author has gone on record to say that when and if he writes more Witcher books, he's not going to worry about clashing with the game canon. He'll only be considering his books canon.
Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about Geralt. Geralt is a Witcher, which is essentially a magical super soldier. Nearly all of his physical capacities are greater than that of the average human. He's stronger, faster, more durable, has better hearing, sense of smell, more acute eyesight in both darkness and light, and he heals more quickly and is nearly immune to poisons and disease. A very useful trait, considering that potions and elixirs in the Witcherverse are inherently toxic, meaning that as a Witcher, Geralt can imbibe more potions than a normal person, or survive the use of particularly powerful potions that would kill or cripple normal humans. Witchers also have a substantially extended life expectancy, with Geralt himself being somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 years old during the books and games. As far as we can tell, almost no one important's age is ever specified in this particular fiction. All these perks don't come free, however. To start with, Witchers are universally sterile, whether as a side effect of the Witcherization process or as an intended component is unknown. Less talked about outside of the Witcher Order, though, is the fact that the magical mutation process is commonly fatal, with a relatively small percentage of trainees surviving the process to become full-blooded Witchers. Those who do survive go on to become the world's premier monster hunters. They combine these magical mutations with years of study in the arts of combat, education in all varieties of monsters and how to handle them, as well as instructions in basic magics. Your average Witcher is no match, magically, for a trained mage, but some magic is better than none, and all of their other training helps bridge the gap when fighting mystical monstrosities in the dead of night. As a final note, during Geralt's initiation and mutation process, it was discovered that his body took to the Witcherization process abnormally well, and he was resultantly hit with a few more modifications. The end result being that he is even more super soldiery than the average Witcher. The additional mutations also resulted in his trademark white hair.
Moving on to his actual story, Geralt was born to a sorceress, and at a young age was given to the Witchers at Kerr, Morin, the base of operations for Geralt's particular Witcher branch. Yes, there are several schools of Witchers. Sorceresses are also gifted with extended longevity and are usually sterile, similar to Witchers. However, Geralt's mother was either old enough that she came into power before these practices were instituted, or she was simply a rogue element. Whatever the story, she had Geralt and then gave him to the Witchers. He spent the next several years of his life studying and training beneath the watchful gaze of his Witcher instructors. When he graduated, he was given a chance to choose his name. His initial choice was Geralt, followed by an obnoxious and ostentatiously long surname. Like 6 words long or something, guys. And the head Witcher told him as much, choosing his name for him after that. Geralt of Rivia. It was the head Witcher's opinion that attaching a Witcher to a region made them feel more homey and relatable to the common folk. A useful trait considering that the largely human population of the world generally looked down upon non-humans, which Witchers were often thrown in with, being heralded as freaks and mutants, their uncommon skill and magical prowess adding to both the mystique and distrust that made up Witcher reputations. Geralt spent a lot of time getting cheated out of money when he kills monsters for people.
Which takes us to the stories of the first two books, which are themselves both collections of short stories. Geralt has several adventures during these pages, many of them acting as framing stories for the world, or telling us how Geralt met some of his most important companions. Chiefly among these, we learn how Geralt met the two most important women in his life. Yennefer of Vengerberg, hereafter simply called Yennefer, seemingly the love of his life, and Cirilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon, hereafter simply called Ciri, his ward and adoptive daughter. In the tale The Last Wish, we learn how Geralt met Yennefer. While fishing, Geralt and one of his oldest living friends by the end of the series, Dandelion, that's Jaskier for anyone watching the Netflix series, fish up a genie bottle. They fight over it, with Dandelion wanting to use the wishes, and Geralt trying to convince Dandelion that djinns are bad news. And during the scuffle, the seal is broken and the djinn is released. Dandelion immediately starts making wishes, only to be attacked by the djinn, and with all their options failing, Geralt tries an old exorcism incantation someone told him once, which he wasn't expecting to work, but did. The djinn fled. The two then race to the nearest town in hopes of finding the local mage, since they need magical healing to handle the wounds Dandelion received at the djinn's hand.
Long story short, this mage turns out to be Yennefer. Beautiful, cunning, brutal. She agrees to heal Dandelion in exchange for access to the djinn. When Geralt predictably doesn't want to play along, she enchants him to run around assaulting town council members, each of whom had a beef with her, until he gets thrown in jail, with her intention being to have Dandelion use his final wish to save his friend Geralt from the legal trouble thereafter, freeing the djinn so that she could attempt to bind its incredible power to be used for her own devices. But they all discover too late that Geralt was actually the one who'd technically opened the genie bottle, making him the master and thus the person with the wishes. They learned this when he caused a guard giving him a hard time in prison to explode via wishing it to be so, which Geralt hadn't expected to happen. It was actually his first wish and not the fake exorcism incantation that had sent the djinn away. With one wish left, but with Yennefer under the false impression that Dandelion had made the final wish, Yennefer attempts to bind the djinn to her service, but it fights her powerfully.
Geralt wants to save her, but this is complicated by three things. First, everyone's fairly certain that the djinn binding ritual will kill Yennefer. Second, he's found himself falling for her. And third, djinn are tricksters. They don't like being locked up, so they will try to screw you out of your wish however possible. That being said, they can't harm their masters, so Geralt needs to find some way to use this last wish to save Yennefer without having the wish come back to, possibly fatally, bite her later. And the best option he can think of seems to be something involving Geralt himself, since the djinn can't hurt him. It is important to note that the author does not tell us what wish Geralt makes here. We only know two things: that he's successful, as the djinn leaves immediately without causing any known problems, and that Yennefer heard his wish. She comments in disbelief on that wish, noting that it seems to bind him to her forever, which may not end well for them. Despite her commentary, the two then get it on fairly quickly thereafter, beginning a very tumultuous relationship that would remain tumultuous for the entirety of the book series and up into the game series as well, with one or the other leaving each other for various reasons, some legitimate, some not, as they are both very damaged people who don't know how to handle a friggin' relationship. Despite that, they always manage to drift back together and seem to develop real feelings for each other somewhere along the way, even if they always make it complicated.
Geralt later ties himself to Ciri in the story A Question of Price. Geralt had been invited to the betrothal feast for the princess of the nation of Cintra by Cintra's queen, not as a potential suitor, but as a guard, as the queen believed shenanigans would be afoot sometime during the proceedings, and Geralt was, by this point, developing a bit of a reputation as a capable witcher. He spends a good portion of the evening talking secretly with a friendly druid who was attending the feast, and finally, the weirdness struck. A knight going by the name of Duny entered, seeking the princess's hand. He had no title, no reasonable claim to her hand, except for one: the Law of Surprise, through which the princess was actually owed to him. The Law of Surprise is an ancient, long-held, and widespread human tradition in the Witcherverse. Essentially, if you save someone's life, and they have nothing with which to repay you, you can invoke the Law of Surprise, which means the debtor gives you something they come home to find that they didn't know was there. This can be anything from a surprise crop of corn, a puppy from a litter, a recently acquired bottle of wine, the list goes on. As an amusing side note, multiple sources also indicate that if you saved a man's life and came home to find his wife cheating on him, The dude she was cheating with was your surprise. You can only imagine what sort of shenanigans that BS leads to.
The most notable possible prize, however, is a child. In this case, Duny saved the life of Cintra's king years before and invoked the Law of Surprises payment. Unknown to either the king or Duny, the queen had been pregnant with the princess at the time, and thus she was Duny's child surprise. Now, years later, he'd come to claim her hand, as was his right by law. As an important note, the kid is actually yours to do with as you will. Marriage is not always, and hopefully / probably not usually, the end result of such a deal. After the Law of Surprise was invoked, Duny's helmet is removed and he's revealed to be some sort of porcupine-esque creature, as he had been inflicted with a curse sometime prior. Seeing a way out of this, the queen decreed that the law could be invoked, but that her daughter had to agree to the union. Which is when it is revealed, much to the queen's chagrin, that Duny and the princess had actually met a year prior and fallen in love, so she readily consented. Things got heated, a fight was started, and somewhere during all that, the princess manifested her latent magical power, conjuring up whipping storm winds within the banquet hall. Through the combined efforts of Geralt, the druid, and some other attendees, they were able to calm the princess enough to get her to cease her magical rampage. Though it's worth noting that in terms of sheer power, she outmatched both Geralt and the druid's magical abilities combined. When it was all said and done, Geralt had saved Duny's life, and in return, Geralt himself invoked the Law of Surprise. Much like it happened years before, the princess was pregnant, unbeknownst to Duny, and so their daughter, Ciri, was then bound to Geralt by ancient law. It's worth noting that in the books, Geralt suspects the princess is pregnant and chose the right for that reason, as new Witcher trainees were often chosen through events such as the Law of Surprise.
Despite his presumed initial plan, Geralt actually encounters Ciri twice more before he actually takes her in and starts going all adoptive dad. First, when she's about 6, he actually shows up back in Cintra to take Ciri with him. While there, he discovered that Duny and the princess had been lost at sea. Fun fact, Duny actually faked his death and was the rightful king to a different nation, Nilfgaard, and he'd gone home to reclaim his throne. The princess really died, though that was an accident. And the queen was just as unwilling to let her granddaughter go as she had been to let her daughter marry Duny. Long story short, Geralt left without ever actually meeting Ciri. Years later, while on a mission to meet the Queen of the Dryads, Geralt stumbles upon Ciri again. Her traveling party had been slain, partially her fault, by both monsters and Dryads, and Geralt saved her, but was forced to watch as she was put through a ritual by the Dryads that would erase all of her previous memories and bring her into the Dryad fold. Except, Ciri is literally a legend. More on that later. And so the ritual didn't work, and she was allowed to leave with Geralt. Somewhere during this mess, both parties realized who the other was. Ciri had been told of the Law of Surprise situation, but despite Ciri's protests, Geralt returned her to Cintra and left once again.
It wouldn't be until later, after Cintra was sacked and Ciri barely escaped with her life, that she would be taken under Geralt's wing. Geralt ended up protecting a truly decent human being from a pack of monsters, but was badly wounded in the process. He invoked the Law of Surprise as his reward, since the merchant in question didn't have anything interesting on him, and the two returned to the merchant's home, with the merchant helping Geralt to heal up along the way. By the time they'd arrived, Geralt was arguing that the merchant's help and first aid was payment enough, but the merchant was stubborn and wanted to reward him. Unbeknownst to either of them, the merchant's wife had taken in Ciri when she'd found the girl in the aftermath of Cintra's destruction. Geralt and Ciri had a genuinely happy reunion, and he claimed his now twice-earned prize. The two set out for Kerr Morin.
Which brings us to the first actual novel, Blood of Elves, wherein Geralt takes Ciri to Kerr Morin to undergo Witcher training. While there, she begins to exhibit traits that none of the Witchers know how to deal with. After clearly beginning to display powerful magical aptitude, falling into trances and speaking prophetic words, then waking with no memory of doing so, for example. They call up a sorceress ally of theirs, Triss, who works with them to try and help Ciri out with her powers, and, as the only woman for miles, helps Ciri with issues a bunch of medieval male soldiers aren't even aware they're clueless about. After a while, Triss confesses that Yennefer, Geralt's old flame and mutual friend of Triss, would be better suited to help Ciri than she. And so eventually they set out, intending to have Ciri properly schooled under Yennefer's tutelage. While Geralt starts looking into assassins sent after Ciri, since, among other things, she is the only living royal blood of Cintra, Along the journey, Ciri learns about the world through more than monster bestiaries along the way, both the good and the bad.
Over the course of this and the next book, Ciri bonds with both Geralt and Yennefer as father and mother figures respectively, but for the vast majority of the rest of the book series, the three of them were actually split up, for years at a time, with Geralt either chasing down those he knows threaten Ciri's well-being or looking for Ciri herself when they're separated, while Yennefer does similar things from a magical angle and spends a tremendous amount of time trapped by fellow mages in one form or another. Meanwhile, Ciri herself spends most of the time on the run, learning magic, practicing swordplay, falling in with the wrong people, and having the absolute worst life of the three, bar none. Geralt finds himself wrangled into kingly politics along the way, making allies and enemies while he tries to find Ciri and ensure that she's safe. He even becomes legitimately knighted as Geralt of Rivia, and somewhere in there, a prophecy comes to light. One about Ciri. It turns out that Ciri is the child of elder blood, the last in a bloodline of magical adepts that had originally been bred by the Elves for the express purpose of granting them access to and control over multiversal gates. The Witcherverse sits in a multiverse, and many of the world's denizens, humans and monsters included, all came to this world from numerous other worlds long ago. One particular band of elves used to be able to travel the multiverse freely, but lost the ability, and bred particularly powerful mages to try and regain that power, with Ciri being the last in the unintended human offshoot of that bloodline.
Not only was she important to the elves, but she was supposedly the world's only hope to survive the White Frost, a prophesied ice age that would envelop most of the known world, killing everything in its wake. Along his journey, Geralt draws a surprisingly large cast of helpful allies, almost all of whom give their lives in a final confrontation with a powerful mage who'd captured Yennefer and sought Ciri for his own gain, unrelated to the plans of the elves, kings, or queens. The book series ends with the three of them split up once more. While so divided, Geralt ends up impaled on a pitchfork of a peasant during a huge race riot. Yennefer and Ciri had been on their way to him and were able to find him before the Witcher died, with Yennefer using all of her strength to heal Geralt and failing to do so, endangering her own life in the process. So, Ciri, with the help of a unicorn, no, really, she's seen some stuff by this point, heals both of them and drops them off on what is heavily hinted to be Avalon from Arthurian myth, to rest and heal, while she herself uses her elder blood powers to peace off to some other world. The story ends with her meeting Sir Galahad, again of Arthurian myth, who mistakes her for the Lady of the Lake.
Which brings us to the video game series. The series picks up about 5 years after the last book, Lady of the Lake, with Witcher 1. During the 5-year gap, Geralt and Yennefer spent an indeterminate period of time living on Avalon before eventually being set upon by the Wild Hunt, a collection of seemingly spectral riders that occasionally terrorized the land and, like many monsters Geralt dealt with on a weekly basis, were considered simple stories by many common folk. The Wild Hunt was, in actuality, led by and mostly formed of elves, specifically the otherworldly elves whose experiments led to Ciri's eventual birth. During the book, Ciri had fallen into and subsequently escaped their clutches, and she's absent during most of the game series because she's world-hopping expressly for the purpose of evading the Wild Hunt. Otherwise, she'd happily stay on Geralt and Yennefer's world with them. Because of this, the Wild Hunt descended upon Geralt and Yennefer's new home and abducted Yennefer, hoping to draw Ciri out using Yennefer as bait. Geralt eventually caught up to them, and despite killing numerous huntsmen, eventually realized he simply couldn't take all of them. And so, he offered his soul in exchange for Yennefer's, which the Hunt readily agreed to since either parent figure was as useful as the other, and Ciri hadn't shown up in the weeks that had Yennefer anyway. So, for some time, Geralt rode with the Wild Hunt, visiting other worlds and taking people as the Hunt was wont to do, until eventually Ciri did catch wind of the fact that the Hunt had Geralt, and she came to him, saved him, and deposited him in the woods near Kerr Morin, before vanishing to another world once more in order to draw the Wild Hunt away from her loved ones.
Somewhere during that whole mess, Geralt's memories were completely wiped, so when his Witcher friends found him, he had to go through some basic re-education in order to remember his years of training and even his name. Though his Witcher friends, along with Triss, who they hoped could help him recover more of his memories, elected not to inform him about most of the deeds of his past, feeling that it would be better to let him remember on his own or not face the burden of those memories or whatever. Realistically, this was the game's nice way of saying, hey, you the player may not know this universe well. Here's our excuse for letting Geralt ask questions that Geralt should probably know the answer to by now. While Geralt's recovering, Kerr Morin is attacked by a criminal organization called Salamandra, and they steal the secrets of how to witcherize people, which gives us the impetus for the plot of the game. As Geralt sets off to try and find the people running Salamandra and recover the Witcher secrets. Each of the Witcher games is an RPG, and as such has numerous paths and choices that the player can make to change the outcome of the story. As such, we're not going to go into too much detail, because the simple fact is that what happens in one chapter affects the next chapters, so you can play through the games in several ways. We're going to focus on just the primary plotline.
So, Geralt heads off in search of Salamandra. Along the way, he performs multiple tasks reminiscent of his adventures from the books, and encounters several old acquaintances, most likely sleeping with just about anyone who will have him along the way. This is not out of character for his book personality, just as a side note. While investigating things that matter, the local fight between two factions will continuously try to rope him into joining one of their sides, which you can do, or, in a unique gaming twist, Geralt can tell both teams to screw themselves, which makes the game harder, but also inherently more awesome, and also means you get Triss as your final battle buddy, and since you've definitely slept with her at least once by this point, and she's a mage, who wouldn't choose her over two random dudes who are only vaguely tolerable anyway? Eventually, you find and kill the leaders of Salamandra, only to discover that a young magical boy you helped along the way has exactly the same powers as Ciri does, which includes the ability to travel through time, and his older self was in fact pulling the strings for many of the bad things going on in a twisted attempt to save the world from the oncoming disaster of the White Frost, as he presumed himself to be the child of prophecy. After Geralt's final confrontation with said time traveler, the Wild Hunt shows up and wants the guy's soul, for obvious reasons considering why they want Ciri, and Geralt can either give the guy to them or fight them off. Either way, the game ends with Geralt stopping an assassination attempt on the local king, an attempted assassination carried out by another Witcher, though not one from Geralt's school.
The second game kicks off with Geralt failing to stop a second assassination attempt by another Witcher, and this time, Geralt sets off to track these Witcher assassins down. Again, having to choose sides, this time in a war, and ultimately, Geralt is given the option to spare or slay the other Witchers. A choice made more complicated by the slow return of some of Geralt's memories over the course of the game, as he discovers via said memories that these same Witchers helped him track down and rescue Yennefer from the Wild Hunt. Regardless of Geralt's choices, some important movers and shakers die, and life carries on because fully half of everyone in this world sucks. And war is constantly raging during this particular period anyway. Most importantly for Geralt, he remembers the existence of his greatest love, Yennefer.
Cut to Witcher 3. Geralt and Yennefer finally reunite, with her story for why she never went looking for him while Geralt was missing his memory being both a legitimate explanation and telling you all you need to know about their weird relationship. More importantly, they come to the knowledge that Ciri has returned to their world, and they set off to try and catch up to her once again. Most of the game consists of Geralt trying to track Ciri down and then learning what's been happening to Ciri while she's been on the run from the Wild Hunt, both in this world and in others. On a more personal level, with all memories and in-game players being present, the player must choose whether to go back to Yennefer, continue the new relationship with Triss that has blossomed over the last two games, or to leave them both behind. There are two final confrontations in this game. The first is a battle at Kaer Morhen, where the Wild Hunt lays siege in order to capture Ciri, and Geralt, Ciri, Yennefer, and whatever allies the player can scrounge up stand to fight them.
Once the hunt is defeated, Ciri then goes to face the White Frost, as the legends foretold. In The Witcher 3, it is revealed that the White Frost isn't simply an oncoming ice age, but a presence of some sort that has been covering realm after realm in frozen death, with Ciri being the only one who can stop it. Geralt can't help her. Instead, the result of Ciri's confrontation with the White Frost are determined, essentially, by how well or poorly the player played the part of a father figure for her during the course of the game, whether you empowered her or simply used her. No matter the outcome, Ciri saves the world from the White Frost, but the aftermath endings range from both Geralt and Ciri likely dying, to both of them living while Ciri either becomes a Witcher or the new Empress in her Bloodfather's stead. The last DLC for the game, Blood and Wine, is a colorful set piece that very definitively acts as the closing chapter in Geralt's story, with numerous moments that allow Geralt to look back on the journey that brought him there. By the DLC's end, he has been gifted a lovely home and vineyard for services rendered, and, depending upon Geralt's choices in the primary game, we're treated to an ending scene with either Geralt's closest living friend, his lover, or his adoptive daughter, all of which are wonderfully heartwarming and nice potential ways of closing the book on Geralt's story. Finally enjoying the peace and security that he has rightfully earned over a lifetime of hardship.
And that's the story of Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf of the Witcher franchise. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and maybe share it with someone you know might like it. If you have ideas for videos you'd like to see us do in the future, do like David Marlin and Maurice Beaver and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, be they lore, let's play, or other, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
In the meantime, this has been True Masters and Morons signing off. We're back! Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to see more like it, hit that subscribe orb.
To see our last Let's Play, click or tap the link on the right.
For our last lore video, click the link on the left.
Thank you to all of our patrons for making these videos possible.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.